Alcohol and alcohol abuse are almost as old as the human race itself. That's the Torah's claim. For early in Genesis, we meet Noah, a righteous man in his generation, who survives the trauma of the flood, only to get drunk and embarrass himself in front of his children. The message could not be clearer. Addiction is a human problem. It's a Jewish problem, and it's part of our story. For generations, we've been reluctant to acknowledge this truth openly. We've celebrated our Jewish tradition as one of health, balance, and moderation, in which we have just a sip of wine for Kiddush, claiming that this somehow insulated us from the dangers of addiction and substance abuse. We've touted Jewish family life as uniquely close, loving, and supportive, claiming that this protected our children from the ills that afflict the larger culture around us. We've regarded chemical dependence as a sign of weak willpower and moral failure. These claims were not only false, they were destructive. They led to a sense of isolation, shame, and abandonment among those who were struggling with addiction, and they were spiritually destructive to those who were not, for we denied our struggling brothers and sisters the warm embrace of community. A community that admits only perfect people, or more accurately, those who pretend to be perfect, is no true community at all. As one path-breaking scholar noted in 1999, over the years, this long legacy of denial among Jews has resulted in unnecessary pain, heartache, and a great deal of alienation from Judaism by those suffering from addiction. I want to thank and honor the courageous members of Beth Am who created Netivot, Pathways, a new group that will offer, instead of silence, stigma, and suffocating loneliness, a new and much more Jewish response to the reality of addiction: honesty and compassion, education, information, and support. Netivot is driven by the highest Jewish value and our supreme imperative, pikuach nefesh, protecting health, saving life. Netivot rests on the idea that it is time to stop pretending, time to open our eyes and see the lives that Jewish families are really living, time to open our ears and listen to their stories, time to open our arms and offer help. That is what we will begin to do tonight, the first of several programs sponsored by Netivot. As we listen this evening, please appreciate that our speakers are making themselves vulnerable in sharing these very personal stories with all of us. Please respect their privacy and their dignity by refraining from gossiping about what you hear tonight. There's an old Jewish saying, words that come from the heart enter the heart. May our hearts be open to the heartfelt words we will hear tonight. May we move forward together, sharing our strength and our vulnerability, remembering that we are all one family. Our first speaker will be Daniel Rosenthal, who was raised in Los Altos and celebrated his bar mitzvah here at Beth Am. He is now in recovery and lives in Southern California. Welcome, Daniel.
Hi. Sorry, I wrote this on my computer as I was coming here. Sure. My name is Daniel Rosenthal. I was born and raised in Los Altos, and as a Reformed Jew, I came to what I believe was the only Reformed Jewish community in this area. Beth Am holds a lot of memories for me, from Sunday school to Hebrew school, ending with my bar mitzvah. I'd like to get straight into my story. I guess you could say I was a popular kid. I was athletic, though not a star in school sports. My parents took me skiing in Lake Tahoe in the winter and water skiing in the summer. I've always loved nature. I became an avid backpacker, climber, skier, snowboarder, surfer, and general outdoor enthusiast. I could never focus in school. I'm intelligent and able, but had no desire to concentrate on education. I asked myself the question of why that is. I can only speculate at this point. My father was an airline pilot and entrepreneur, so was gone usually more than 15 days a month. My mother worked part and full-time too. I have no memory of anyone sitting down and doing homework with me. Left to my own devices, I became addicted to entertainment. Luckily, books were a big part of that in my younger years. Some of my vocabulary and comprehension were developed. The discipline of homework, classes, and formal education were not. I must say here that this is my story. In my story, I've met hundreds of with their own. Everyone from people who went to Ivy League schools to those who grew up in the projects. My reasons may not be theirs, but the results are always the same. It usually ends up in a room, alone, wishing you were anybody else with different problems that you could deal with better than your own. I was a good kid who cared about people. I never tried to become a criminal. When I first started smoking marijuana, it lifted a veil of boredom and ignited a sense of adventure that really did consume me. My lack of interest in school and desire for adventures and getting high caused my first rehab experience in high school. I also did the Wayward Youth Wilderness Camp and eventually Outward Bound in Colorado Rockies. My parents sent me to junior college up in Humboldt, where I tried to finish the 2 years of credits to get into a better school. It was too late. During one of my LSD experiences, I was drawn to going to Israel for a year to travel and see my homeland and whatever that meant. I took a year off and went to Israel, and at a very big shock to me, became a Baal Tshuva. As some of you know, that means the newly religious. As a California kid, that was a tough pill to swallow. I always felt great scorn for organized religion, and to become a person who believed in the Bible was unexpected, to say the least. To make matters worse, it turns out there's lots of rules for the religious, as I'm sure some of you know. Lots of holidays too, each one with many lessons and traditions and rules. I got so into it as the hippie outdoorsman California kid that I instantly jumped into the mystic teachings of the Kabbalah. Turns out that if you do that, there's even more rules. Judaism truly has to be the most OCD religion in the world. You guys do know what I'm talking about. They even have an order of how to cut your nails if you dig deep enough. I couldn't become a rabbi. I'm not scholarly enough to even try and attempt that path. I didn't know what I could do. I tried selling hash while I was in Israel and even had LSD sent to me to sell. I got arrested for the hash and spent time in an Israeli prison where I tried heroin for the first time. These are stories upon stories I could tell, but this is just a basic overview. Knowing I had no way to support myself and thoroughly confused about who I was as a religious Jew, I went home and stayed in Berkeley with a friend. Let's keep a long story shorter. It didn't take long for me to find my way to the streets of San Francisco, the Haight-Ashbury District, and Golden Gate Park. It's where I learned how to shoot drugs for the first time. Drug dealing and using became my life. After a while, I started getting arrested and going to jail. Shooting drugs is an addiction that's hard to give up. I experienced one state-run rehab center and did pretty well, but with no direction, it was very easy to fall back into a cycle of what they call R&R, release and return. I've been to San Quentin, Corcoran, Tracy, and a couple other state prisons, usually 3 to 8 months at a time. One day, while I was at CMC State Prison in San Luis Obispo, I went to the Jewish outreach, which was always a risky proposition since racism and the prison system is institutionalized, and being Jewish is not something I wanted to advertise. A Jewish outreach social worker told me about a Jewish rehab that was co-ed in Los Angeles. I was tired of dragging along the bottom and made the commitment to at least try. Stayed sober for 10 years after that. It wasn't easy, and I feel a lot of luck, or some would say a huge gift from above, that I found my way to a career with no college degree and a felony record. The entertainment industry is unusual that if you show up and show a high degree of competence, that you are able to get a great job with tremendous responsibility. My penchant for exploration and adventure fit perfectly with a job of location scout manager for features, TV, and commercials. Today, I own a house thanks to the help of my mother and the excellent timing of the biggest housing crash in U.S. history. And I'm blessed to be in a union with health insurance and benefits. To me, that has been the biggest miracle of them all. I wish I could say I lived happily ever after, but one thing I think people need to hear more than anything else is that with this disease, there is never a happily ever after. A couple years ago, due to stress and back injury, I relapsed with the most dangerous addiction of them all, pain pills that led me into heroin. I survived that relapse and still struggle every day with keeping positive and digging out of the hole that created. Each part of my story has a million stories that could be told. I actually don't like talking about myself and get bored with telling it. I'm doing this because I'm surprised that this place of all places is just starting to take the issue on. Everyone listening right now is affected by this issue, whether from someone very close to you or someone you know or someone you don't even know is dealing with it right now. Mental illness and depression are just symptoms, or the insidious disease of addiction doesn't have to happen all at once. It can get worse and worse over years, even decades. In the very recent U.S. history, meaning happening right now, they've been passing out opioids like it's candy. Purdue Pharmaceutical flooded markets targeting drug users for profits. What they didn't know was the flood was going to reach biblical proportions, all the way to the suburbs and upper-class neighborhoods, like this one. Their defense is to blame the users as irresponsible. It's a defense that works until it doesn't. For those of you who may host politicians every 2 and 4 years, I hope that you let them know this issue is front and center in your lives. There are so many solutions that it's frustrating to have to talk about it as if it's something new. The war on drugs is basically a war on you and the people you care about most. Using law enforcement to try and solve this problem is like expecting police officers to have medical and psychiatric degrees and just hoping they are actually empathetic people. They don't, and lots of them aren't. And they only intensify the problem. It's truly like pouring gasoline on a fire to try and put it out. It's a complicated issue that will take a holistic approach, which includes treatment for mental health and depression. I do hope Beth Am as a community can find the right people to address this issue. Everything you do to invest in solutions can and will help. Just hoping that the devastation misses you and the people around you is a ticking time bomb. Eventually, it will blow up in your life. Hopefully my story will help you get this most important conversation going. There are so many solutions. Maybe we can't do them all at once, but each step we take forward could be the one that actually saves you or your family or friend or boss or employee. No one is immune, and we should all be working together to work on these solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Our second speaker is Neil Brownstein. He and his wife, Linda, have been active members of Beth Am for more than 40 years.
Shabbat Shalom. And Chag Sameach, Pesach, 1 week from now. Pesach is our Jewish story. You've heard from Daniel, a very impressive young person who, like many of us, have encountered a disease that is very difficult to wrestle with. Each year, I hear a Haggadah with a different ear and with a different mind. I think about our Jewish peoplehood, as Rabbi Martyr just alluded to. I think about generations then and now and since, mystically receiving our Torah from Mount Sinai. And I think about my personal bondage, liberation and freedom. Thank you, Lori Ford, and the Beth Am Library Committee for pointing me to a new book that I hadn't read before, Rabbi Abraham Twersky's Haggadah, From Bondage to Freedom, with personal reflections on being captives of substance abuse. And thank you, Nancy and Rabbi Martyr and the Netivot Committee for giving me the honor of talking about my Beth Am experiences with addiction. My name is Neil Brownstein. 10 years ago, I did not envision this story would be my story. My family are members of Congregation Beth Am for over 40 years. Beth Am is our spiritual home. It's our Torah home. It's our family life cycle home. Our children were bar and bat mitzvahed here. My first wife, Linda Karen Brownstein, her funeral was here in this sanctuary, in this very spot. Linda and I were married by Beth Am clergy, as was one of our children. As our dear friend Manny Gerard says, all of life's rich pageant. 10 years ago, our son, Todd Brownstein, announced to himself, to his family, to me, his friends, that he was an addict, a cocaine addict. Very close friends of ours, with addiction and alcohol knowledge, led Todd through an intervention. The next day, Todd entered himself into a residential rehab program, guided by some very top-notch clinicians. His path, one day at a time, is his path. Early in the recovery program, Todd suggested to me, quote, "Dad, I will be in charge of my own recovery. You be in charge of yours." His recovery, one day at a time, has had many ups, many downs, and there's still ups and downs going on. My recovery, as a parent of an addict, has had different ups and different downs, and still does to this very day. I recall my emotions at that shocking moment of my life: anger, fear, bewilderment, confusion. Anger like Moses seeing the golden calf. How could this be possible? Fear, perhaps like Jacob when confronted by his brother Esau, not knowing what to do. Bewilderment perhaps like the burning bush. Why, what, or how? I did not feel shame. Many of us do in this community, but I did not. I felt that my Beth Am community and my broader community was there for me. I embarked at that moment on what is still today a lifelong journey to learn about the disease of addiction. I participated in family workshops, classes, group therapy. I devoured books and research, trying to understand my son's disease and behavior, and then to try to understand my own behavior. 10 years ago, my knowledge of addiction was zero. Today, 10 years later, I still don't know enough about this dreadful disease. The Beth Am Library has over 30 books available to us to browse, to read, to study. From one book, David Sheff's Beautiful Boy, that some of us may be familiar with, drug overdoses are now the leading cause of death for Americans under 50. While addiction treatment is massively underfunded and underregulated, there are those professionals working tirelessly in all communities to combat this disease. There is help out there for those who are struggling. Al-Anon parents' meetings became my go-to place to listen to the stories of others and to start listening to my own story, my own behavior, my own codependency. Todd announced to himself and to me and to Linda and to his family and to his friends that he needed help. I held him. I recalled our many times together here at Beth Am, listening to Torah, listening to drashas, listening to the story of Abraham. Here I am, Abraham said. I held Todd that day in March 2009, and I said, here I am, Hineni. I also heard the echoes of other Torah readings. I call heaven and earth to witness today. I put before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore, choose life. These words I had shared over decades with my son at my side as we chanted and prayed. I was so afraid of the dark and unknown paths ahead of us. There are hundreds of stories, as Daniel mentioned, that I heard and he heard and all of us have heard, and I shared at Al-Anon with friends and on this lifelong journey of recovery. Stories of overdosing, stories of loved ones failing and falling, stories of fathers' denial, stories of mothers closing the door on her daughter who could not bring herself to take on the responsibility of recovery. The most difficult stories I heard told of the loss of love for the addict and the alcoholic. As Rabbi Jonathan Sachs notes, the Talmud tells the story of a rabbi who was a faith healer. All he had to do was lay his hands on someone and they were cured. Then one day he fell ill and called for a friend to come and heal him. Why couldn't he heal himself, asks the Talmud, and then answers. Sometimes, oftentimes, self-help isn't enough. We need the support of people around us. This is the purpose of our Netivot group here at Beth Am. One lesson from my own recovery are the 3 C's. I did not cause it. I cannot control it. I cannot cure it. But the most important lesson for me along this path is love the person, unquestionably. Hate the disease. Shabbat Shalom.
Our third and last speaker tonight is our member Peg Crum, who is well known here for the Wise Aging groups she's led and her training as a spiritual director and grief counselor.
Shabbat Shalom. It's a great honor to be here as part of this really special, extraordinary committee, Netivot. Thank you to the rabbi for honoring us and making sure that we had space and could be heard. So, I don't need my glasses, thank you. He's always taking good care of me. All that I say tonight is based only on my story, on my experience, on my increased awareness and understanding of the family disease of alcoholism. All of my life, at least 4 generations on both sides of my family have been seriously affected by this insidious disease. My family, a nice Jewish Midwestern family, first-generation Americans, hardworking, both college-educated parents, successful with our own nice home in the suburbs in a nice neighborhood, 2 cars in the garage. No one knew or would ever have guessed that this cunning and baffling disease of alcoholism riddled my family. But I wanted to say a very key point, that this cunning and baffling disease of alcoholism, and it is those things, does not necessarily mean that a person's falling down in the gutter, destitute, alone, and jobless, homeless, and friendless. No, it's hidden, insidious, and confusing. It took me many, many years into my late 30s as a single mom of 2 little boys to begin to realize the profound impact that this family disease had and continued to have on me. I was able to begin to name the alcoholism and look at its impact on me, how I felt about myself, and every relationship that I was involved with. And I say family disease because, as Al-Anon has helped me realize, that if there was a drinking problem, and there was in my family, every single member of the family will be affected. Even if you think you're not, you are. Whether it's your grandfather, your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, your child, you are affected. The disease of alcoholism has impacted how I felt about myself, my self-worth or lack thereof, how overly responsible I felt for everything and was made to feel, the sense of how I was never enough, never good enough, never did enough, and never right enough. I always felt frightened, felt alone, and very self-doubting. The disease of alcoholism in my family was never, ever named, never referred to, never acknowledged or discussed. This denial is the number one characteristic defining this disease. Denial by the alcoholic that they have a problem, denial by friends and family that there is a serious unspoken problem affecting every family in every relationship. My family was filled with secrets and lies, hiding, avoiding, and all too common and frequent occurrence in any family affected by this disease. It was so confusing growing up in my family because we looked rather okay on the outside, a nice brick house, and as I said, 2 cars and, clean clothes and fresh seasonal things in the fall for school. It was impossible for me to know what was true and what was real. Now let's add that veil of shame, which those of us affected by this disease know all too well, along with the denial, and I realized much later in my life that I was so ashamed of my family and of myself. All of my life, this confusion about what was real, who could I really believe, all of the tension and fear had a continual and serious impact on me physically and emotionally. This disease affected my thoughts, my feelings, my behavior, my attitudes, my choices of friends and love relationships. Through my participation in Al-Anon, I've learned that alcoholism is a disease that for me or anyone living with active alcoholism to heal from requires 3 steps. First, awareness that I am and was affected by someone else's drinking, in my case, many people's. Then number 2, acceptance, the beginning of accepting the painful reality and to move out of the blinding denial. And then only after these 2 stages have I been able to move toward action, identifying what could I do differently, not to cure the alcoholic or to stop them from drinking, but what can I do to heal myself? There are 20 questions that Al-Anon has established that can be asked when someone's drinking is troubling you. Just a couple of these telling questions are, number 1, do you worry about how much someone else drinks? Number 2, do you feel that if the drinker really cared about you, he or she would just stop drinking? Number 3, do you try to smell the drinker's breath? These are just a few examples of those telling questions. Using this new lens, I began to discover the insidious, secretive nature of this disease. I also began to see that I had some choices and that my healing was actually possible, whether the alcoholic was still drinking or not, whether my alcoholic family members were alive or not. I could still actually find happiness and contentment no matter what the alcoholic did or did not do. Al-Anon is a non-denominational, spiritually based program of recovery for family and friends of alcoholics. It is in full alignment with our Jewish values and our practice. Al-Anon has saved my life. That's an emotional thing to say. I realized that I was not alone. I was not the only one suffering from this disease. That sense of isolation began to disappear. No one needs to take this recovery journey alone. That's the blessing. I have learned to let the collective support of this program to sustain me. The first slogan I ever saw in the first Al-Anon meeting I ever attended in Boston was called the 3 C's, which Neil stated, but I don't think we could ever hear it enough. Number 1, I learned I did not cause it, but I had thought it was all my fault. Number 2, I learned I could not control it. And believe me, I had tried. And number 3, I learned and continue to realize that I cannot cure it, which was really hard to learn, that powerlessness of acceptance. I was stunned. I began to realize how very powerless I am over this disease and its insanity. I am powerless over how anyone else behaves, or what they choose to do or not to do. I began to slowly realize the only one I had any control over was me, slightly. My attitude, my behavior, and my choices. Al-Anon exists around the world and is in every state in the U.S. And according to a recent survey by Al-Anon, that's 7 out of 10 people who attend an Al-Anon meeting are aware that the disease has existed in their family, just like mine, for at least 2 generations. Thank you for your kind listening and being here tonight. Feel free after tonight's service to reach out to any of us who have a name tag like this, a red and white one, for us to answer questions or to make a contact. Also, we would like to invite you to join the Netivot group at 2 or more of our upcoming informational sessions, and the handout that you picked up when you walked in the room has all that information. They will be held on Tuesday evenings, April 30th, May 14th, and June 4th at 7 p.m. Thank you so much for your kind ears.
I want to offer my deep thanks to all our speakers, and especially to our member Nancy Fernbach, sitting right there, a licensed clinical social worker and a wonderful therapist who has provided leadership and guidance to Netivot since the group came together many months ago. Thank you, Nancy. We offer a blessing for healing.